Hi Year 12s, so today we're going to be looking at the effects of partial sleep deprivation. So, with sleep deprivation, it is a general term used to describe a state caused by inadequate quantity or quality of sleep, either voluntarily or involuntarily. So essentially that your quality of sleep is not as good as what you would like, and the quantity is not as much as you would like. So this means that sleep deprivation may occur because we choose to go without sleep, such as when we stay up all night with our friends, or to watch a sports match, or just putting it out there, studying. It may also occur due to reasons outside our control, such as when we work a night shift, roster, travel rapidly across multiple time zones, or have a sleep disorder. So if it's voluntary, it's because you choose to. Involuntary, it's because you have no other choice in the matter. I would actually recommend putting this particular diagram in. It's just for good to know. Alright, so sleep quantity refers to the amount of sleep that you're actually getting and can be measured objectively using time, so how much you're actually sleeping, and your sleep diary will actually do this. The sleep quality refers to how well we actually feel once we have slept. So how do you feel once you get up the next day? So this primarily relies on subjective self-report measures. So there's nothing that we can actually say, this is what it feels like. We tend to judge sleep quality on the basis of how rested or recovered we feel on waking throughout the day. So psychologists often use the terms restfulness and restorative when describing sleep quality. In VCAR, we tend to actually look at, or in VCE psychology, we tend to look at partial sleep deprivation more than we do total sleep deprivation. Partial sleep deprivation involves having less sleep, either quality or quantity, than what is normally required or needed. This may occur periodically or persistently over the short term or long term. And you may want to also put this one in as well. So sometimes you might have more sleep, but you're waking up throughout this entire time. So you're not going into stage 4 than what you normally would. So most sleep disorders are associated with partial sleep deprivation. That's what tends to be looked at in VCE psychology. So total sleep deprivation involves not having any sleep at all over a short-term or long-term period. Right? So we're saying 24 hours, no sleep whatsoever. So the person stays awake for one or more days or weeks, and it usually takes place under extreme conditions, such as when they try to break records. The longest period of total sleep deprivation that is widely recognized is 18.7 days, and I believe it was somebody associated with a radio host or something like that, and he stayed awake for that entire time, and he was hallucinating, he couldn't think straight, he had some serious issues afterwards. So the effects of sleep deprivation. It tends to be minor and temporary, and you tend to overcome it once you've gained back some of that sleep. So when the accrued sleep debt is repaid, the person will quickly recover from the sleep loss, but with successive nights of inadequate sleep, the sleep debt can accumulate and the sleep deprivations can multiply. So if you keep having poor sleep every single time, there is a good chance that it'll take you longer to recover from it. And although we don't need to fully compensate for lost hours of sleep to recover from sleep deprivation, there is considerable research evidence that long-term sleep deprivation places the individual at greater risk for a range of diseases and health problems, including obesity, diabetes, and various cardiovascular diseases. So the less you sleep, the more likely it is that you will become obese, that you might get diabetes, that you might have heart problems. You also have an increased risk of accident or injury, and that's usually because you're not paying enough attention. So, its sleep deprivation effects are usually broken up into 3 different types of functioning: affective, behavioural, and cognitive. Affective functioning tends to be your feelings, your emotions. So you're easily irritated and short-tempered after they awaken from poor sleep or if you've not slept. It may interfere with emotional regulation and reactivity. So you're more likely to react in really exaggerated ways. You tend to have amplified emotional responses. So each time, right, something that you would have just gone, oh, that's so annoying, right, you might actually snap and you'll yell at people. And it'll be quicker. So more things are going to irritate you. And it tends to be exaggerated to the point where, you're yelling at parents just because they happen to, say one thing when in reality you probably wouldn't if you'd had a good night's sleep. Affective functioning, once again, is all to do with emotions. It also compromises our brain's ability to process emotional information. So it's not about our thoughts, it's about emotional information, how we process what other people are actually feeling and saying and doing, right? And then regulate how we actually react to that. So it's harder to judge other people's emotions and makes us more prone to unwarranted emotional outbursts. So for example, if somebody says, whatever, right, you tend to process it differently than what you would normally. Normally, I hear you guys say, yeah, whatever, all the time, but if you're sleep deprived, you're more like, what do you mean, whatever? Oh my God. And it gets really bad. So our emotional response threshold can be lowered, increasing our emotional reactivity, making us more likely to overreact to relatively neutral events. We also tend to make poor judgments in relation to our emotional responses, and we find it hard to control our impulses. We tend to do, silly things just because we can, and we're tired and we can't remember. So behavioural functioning, so that's the second one. So A for affective, B for behavioural. So with behaviour, these are your actions. So your sleep deprivation also influences our behavioural functioning, such as sleep inertia. And that's when you are, waking up in the morning, because you haven't had a good night's sleep, you tend to feel groggy. And it takes you a while to actually wake up and you feel disorientated, and it takes a while for you to become alert, right? So it's a state of grogginess, and it's strongest at wake time, but it tends to dissipate or decay after you've, woken up slightly. Another effect is excessive sleepiness during normal waking time. This is something that gets brought up quite a lot. This bit here, the excessive sleepiness. I would recommend, if they ask you what's a behavioural symptom of sleep deprivation, your first thing should be excessive sleepiness. Fatigue is another common symptom, which means that you're constantly tired, you have a lack of energy, right? It also reduces our efficiency. So we tend to take longer to finish tasks. Because we're so tired, we have to think about everything. So it takes longer to actually finish tasks. And you might have slower than normal reaction times. So not sleeping can have the same sort of effect as a BAC of 0.05, right? And that's for 17 hours. For 24, it's 0.10, right? And so you have a slower reaction time, which means you make more mistakes. And they're all combined. So the affective, the behavioural, the cognitive, they're all combined, right? So the slower reaction time is another one, right? You tend to take longer to actually react. But your emotions don't, funnily enough. So another behavioural effect, and it needs to go under behaviour, is a microsleep. And this is where you have an unintentional, involuntary lapse into sleep. And it's very, very brief. And it can only last for a couple of seconds, and you have a fixed gaze, a blank expression, and you don't blink. And you can remain standing, you can remain sitting, whatever. You're just less responsive, and you're actually asleep. And some people can have a microsleep with their eyes open. And it may last 1 to 10 seconds. And This happens a lot when you're driving. So those people who are interested in doing, a road trip once they leave school, and it's probably a good idea because we probably won't be able to leave the country for a while. If you happen to be driving along a long stretch of road, microsleeps happen a lot, and there'll be a point where you don't even realize that anything has happened, right? And I have to admit, even I've had microsleeps whilst driving, and it's scary because you'll suddenly just wake up and you go, oh, how did I get here? And so a microsleep, they're quite scary because anything can happen in those 10 seconds. And that's why they have those little signs. They do recommend that you pull over, because they know that if you, pull over to the side and have a nice little sleep, there's a good chance that you'll probably sleep for longer than the 10 seconds. Might sleep for a couple of hours. So behavioural functioning, once again, your actions. It might include impaired regulation or control of behaviour. So you tend to misbehave more. And that's why a lot of kids in primary school, pretty much the late primary school and early high school, tend to actually misbehave more because they're not sleeping at night time, and then they come to school so tired, so they misbehave more. So that's bad. Higher teacher rated inattentiveness by students in class, right? Because they're so tired, they're not paying attention in class, so teachers keep telling them off. Poor teacher rated social functioning by school children. If your emotions are going to be all over the place, there is a good chance that you are not going to be able to be, have good interactions with your friends. School lateness and absenteeism. A lot of kids are showing up late because they're sleeping in or they're refusing to get up. Low participation rate in extracurricular activities at school. So kids are actually refusing to do additional activities because they're afraid that, they might do something wrong, or they're just too tired and fatigued in order to do it. There's higher injury rates and injury-prone behaviours in preschool and school-aged children because they're not paying attention. So they do, they make mistakes. Reduced motor coordination, particularly eye-hand coordination. This is because we've got slower reaction times, and reduced speed and accuracy. So it takes them longer to actually think about things and do tasks because they have to think about it constantly. So cognitive is the thoughts. So the issues with thoughts. So cognitive functioning has been affected, and that's mainly because of attention. You can't focus if you're sleep deprived. And this is why you guys should be having at least 6-7 hours of sleep per night minimum. Which, when you look at your sleep diary, there's a good chance that you will not be getting 6 to 7 hours. So the greater the sleep deprivation, the more likely it is that attention will be impaired, and the errors associated with the loss of attention will increase. It's even more likely when a task lacks interest or complexity. So if you're sleep deprived, there is a good chance that you are going to have less interest and less attention on tasks you don't like. So let's say, for example, you've only slept 1 or 2 hours last night, and you're listening to this PowerPoint right now, and you're going, oh my god, this is so boring. This is so boring. Most of you aren't even watching. I'd really be interested if you're actually watching. Please let me know. Anyway, you're going to not be paying attention. Because it doesn't interest you anymore, and that's going to be problematic, right? When you're sleep deprived, you also have an inability to think clearly, and especially when it requires complex thought, because it takes you longer and more attention to actually focus on something that's hard, you just give up on it. And it may impair various learning and memory processes. You should keep this in mind. If you have not had a good night's sleep, you won't be able to remember as much as what you would if you were actually sleeping, a full night of, a full amount of hours per night. It's just common knowledge. It's a fact. So if your exams and you haven't slept, there is a good chance that you're not going to remember what you've already studied. And hopefully you've actually studied. So to sum up, total sleep deprivation is no sleep for 24 hours. Partial sleep deprivation, the quality and or quantity of sleep is less than required or desired. Partial sleep deprivation symptoms are temporary and minor. The affective symptoms, so your thoughts, are easily irritated, short-tempered, and amplified emotional responses. Sorry, not thoughts, your feelings. Behavior symptoms, you have sleep inertia, which is that grogginess. Excessive sleepiness during normal waking time. Fatigue and lack of energy, they're together, not separate. Take longer to finish tasks, slower than normal reaction times. You have a microsleep, which is a brief period of sleep lasting up to a few seconds. Cognitive symptoms, which are your thoughts. It adversely affects attention. There are errors associated with a loss of attention will increase, reduced ability to think clearly, and impair various learning and memory processes. So here's a worked exam question, and we're sort of relating it back to tasks that we looked at in previous PowerPoints. So describe the effects of sleep deprivation on driving and compare these with the effects of legal blood alcohol concentrations, or BAC, 3 marks. So where do we get the 3 marks from? It says describe, so you need to actually put some sort of definition in there. You need to actually give interpretations. So you need to describe the effects of sleep deprivation and compare it with the effects of legal drug alcohol concentrations. So let's have a look. So you need to have a statement that says 24 hours of sleep deprivation is equivalent to a blood alcohol concentration, or BAC, of 1.0. That's the 0.10%. It's the same thing. Or twice the legal limit. So you need to be saying that, right, because this is what it says, the effects of legal blood alcohol concentration. Sleep deprivation, and you need to relate it. So that's your first mark. You need to say the effects of sleep deprivation. That's one of your marks here. And you could actually have, because it says effects, you could also put in more than one, because it says effects. It means more than one. So invalid impairments on driving, such as slower reaction times, which we looked at today, increased chance of microsleep, which we also looked at, poorer concentration / alertness, perceptual distortion, reduced visual acuity. As long as you have those first couple, we're good, right? And you'll get your marks. You need to have the comparison of the effect of driving to the legal BAC of 0.05. So if you put that in there as well, you'll get your 3 marks. And that's how you get this one. So describe is usually define, and I'm going to try and write it. They need to put a text function on the PowerPoint. Why don't they do that? It's so annoying. All right, so you need to define the effects. I know that sounds weird, but you're defining and describing the effects of sleep deprivation and how it would compare with the effects of blood alcohol concentrations. So it's equivalent. It is not the same. It is just the equivalent. So it's similar. And then do the task should you wish. I do recommend that if it says boxes, have a look at them. There'll be a different task though for remote learning. Thank you. Have a good week. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask.